Welcome to HFY Codex. If you love epic sci-fi stories where humanity shines, you're in the right place. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for thrilling HFY adventures. Join us and be part of the journey. The unexpected reward. Marcus stood at the edge of the Great Hall, his heart racing with anticipation. The mission had been long and dangerous, but it had ended in victory. He had eliminated one of the most feared warlords in the galaxy, bringing peace to a region on the brink of chaos. For his bravery, he had been summoned by the Intergalactic Alliance to receive his reward. He had fought in countless battles, but this time felt different. He had done more than just defeat an enemy. He had saved millions of lives. Marcus expected a grand prize, perhaps a new starship, a planet of his own, or wealth beyond imagination. But what he was about to receive was far from what he imagined. The doors of the hall opened, and a procession of high-ranking officers entered. Marcus stood tall, his uniform perfectly pressed, his hands clasped behind his back. He had prepared himself for anything, but nothing could prepare him for what came next. The officers stopped in front of him, and one of them stepped forward with a large chest in hand. As it opened, Marcus expected to see treasure or advanced technology. Instead, what he saw made his stomach twist. Inside the chest, there was a woman. She was bound in chains, her body bruised and battered, her eyes filled with fear and defiance. Her hair was tangled, and she wore a tattered uniform that marked her as a prisoner. She was beautiful, but it was a beauty marked by hardship. Her eyes met Marcus's, and for a brief moment, the world around him seemed to disappear. "This," the officer said, his voice cold and emotionless, "is your reward. She is a symbol of your victory. A slave taken from the enemy's ranks. She is yours to command." Marcus stared at the woman in disbelief. A slave. This was his reward. His mind raced. How could this be? He had expected riches, power, or anything but a human being bound in chains. The woman remained silent, her gaze unwavering. She didn't speak, didn't beg, just watched Marcus with eyes that told a story of pain, survival, and defiance. He could see the fire in her eyes, a fire that had not been extinguished by her captivity. The officer handed Marcus a set of keys. The cold metal, a stark reminder of the reality before him. "Her name is Lyra," the officer continued. "She is a prisoner of war. Her people are rebels who fought against the Alliance, and she was captured in the final battle. You may do as you wish with her." Marcus took the keys, but his hands felt numb. This was not what he had fought for. He had fought to protect people, to bring peace, not to receive another living soul as a reward. He was supposed to be a hero, yet this moment felt wrong. Lyra's eyes never left him. There was something about her, something beyond her chains and bruises. Despite everything, she held herself with dignity. She was a warrior, not a prisoner. It was clear in the way she stood, the way she looked at him. She had been broken by war, but she had not been crushed. "Take her," the officer urged. "She is yours now." Marcus hesitated, unsure of what to do. He was supposed to be a warrior, a man who obeyed orders. But this didn't feel right. The woman before him was not a prize to be claimed. She was a victim of war, caught in the same conflict that had led him to this point. His mind was in turmoil, torn between duty and the growing sense of unease. What was he supposed to do with her? Was she really his to command, or was she a symbol of something darker, a reminder of the cost of war? Lyra's eyes seemed to pierce through him, as if she could sense his inner conflict. She didn't speak, but her gaze told him everything. She wasn't asking for pity. She wasn't begging for freedom. She simply wanted to survive. After what felt like an eternity, Marcus took a step forward. He unlocked the chains. his hands shaking slightly as the metal fell to the ground with a heavy clank. Lyra didn't move, but the weight of the chains around her seemed to lift, if only for a moment. She stood there, looking at him, waiting for him to give her some direction. Marcus was unsure of what to say, unsure of what to do. She was no longer a prisoner in chains, but neither was she free. For the first time in his life, Marcus realized that not all victories were as clear-cut as they seemed. This woman, this warrior, had been part of a larger conflict, and now her fate was tied to his. He turned to the officers, his voice steady despite the turmoil inside. "I will take her with me," he said, the words feeling strange as they left his lips, "but I will not command her. She is not my servant." The officers exchanged glances, but they didn't argue. They had given him a reward, and now it was up to him how he would handle it. As Marcus led Lyra out of the hall, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of something far more complicated than he had ever imagined. What had started as a victory in battle was now leading him into a new, uncertain path. He didn't know it yet, but this was the moment that would change everything. This was the moment that would lead to a bond, a connection that no one could have predicted. And it all started with a reward, a chained woman, and a decision that would set the course for both their futures. Asterisk. The bond unseen the days that followed, Marcus found himself in a strange new world. Gone were the battles, the weapons, the clear lines of right and wrong. Now he was alone with Lyra, an alien woman, once a prisoner of war, now free in his care. The Alliance had handed her over as a reward, but Marcus could not see her as such. Her past weighed heavily on her, and he could feel it in the silence that hung between them every day. He tried to break through the wall of silence that surrounded her, but she remained distant, speaking only when necessary. There was no gratitude in her voice, no joy in her eyes, just a deep, unshakable weariness. Her world had been torn apart by war, and Marcus was now a stranger in that story. Yet, as the days passed, Marcus couldn't help but notice the flickers of something more beneath the surface. She wasn't just a victim. She was a warrior in her own right, someone who had fought with everything she had to protect her people. Lyra's strength wasn't just physical. It was the strength of survival, of someone who had been through the worst of the galaxy and lived to tell the tale. One evening, Marcus found her sitting outside their temporary quarters, staring at the stars above. Her posture was still rigid, her eyes distant, but there was something almost serene about her. It was as if she was searching for something, something beyond the pain that had once defined her. Marcus, unsure of how to approach her, walked quietly over and sat beside her. For a moment, they both simply stared at the stars, the vastness of space stretching endlessly before them. It was the same sky Marcus had looked up at countless times, but somehow, tonight, it felt different. It felt as though the weight of the galaxy was pressing in on them both. "I've never been this far from home," Marcus said, breaking the silence. His voice was soft, as though speaking too loudly would shatter the moment. "I'm not sure what to do with all this." Lyra didn't respond immediately. Marcus had no idea if she was even listening. But then she spoke. Her voice was quiet, almost as if she was afraid someone might overhear. "I've never known peace," she said. "Only war. And now I find myself here, with you, a stranger." Marcus looked at her, his heart heavy. He understood the truth in her words. For her, peace was a foreign concept. For him, it had been something he had taken for granted. She had been a soldier, a leader in her own fight for freedom, but now she was just a woman, adrift in a galaxy that had no place for her. "I'm not your enemy," Marcus said, his voice firm but gentle, "and I'm not here to control you. You don't have to fight anymore." Lyra's gaze met his for the first time since they had arrived. There was no anger. In her eyes, just an overwhelming sadness. "It's hard to stop fighting," she admitted. "It's all I've ever known. Even when you give me freedom, I don't know how to live without the war." Marcus felt a wave of compassion for her. He had never been in her shoes, never known what it was like to be trapped in a constant state of conflict. He had fought for honor, for glory, but Lyra had fought for survival, for the survival of her people. She had carried the burden of war in ways he could never understand. "I don't want to keep you in chains," Marcus said quietly, "but I can't pretend that I have all the answers. Maybe we both have to learn how to live again, together." 4. The first time Lyra looked at him as though she truly saw him. It was a fleeting moment, but it was enough. "I don't know what that means," she replied, her voice still uncertain, "but I'll try." "For you?" In that moment, something shifted between them. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was a beginning. Marcus realized that freeing Lyra from her chains wasn't enough. She needed more than freedom. She needed healing. And that would take time. As the days passed, Marcus and Lyra's relationship changed. They still spent much of their time in silence, but now it was a silence that felt more comfortable, more familiar. They shared meals, spoke occasionally, and slowly their bond grew. But it wasn't easy. Lyra still fought with the ghosts of her past, and Marcus was still a soldier at heart, struggling to find a new purpose. Yet, with every passing day, their connection deepened. Lyra began to speak more, her voice gaining strength. She shared her story, bit by bit, each word revealing a piece of the woman she had once been: a leader, a warrior, and, most of all, a survivor. Marcus listened, and as he did, he realized that he was no longer seeing her as the woman who had been given to him as a reward. He was seeing her for who she truly was, a person with a past, a future, and a heart that could still love. And though they were far from a happy ending, Marcus knew that this bond they were forming was something worth fighting for. Not just because it was unexpected, but because it was real. In that moment, Marcus made a vow to himself. He would not be the man who owned her. He would be the man who helped her rebuild what had been lost, piece by piece, until she was whole. Again, their journey had just begun. And Marcus knew that whatever lay ahead, he would face it with Lyra by his side. The first challenge, the quiet moments between Marcus and Lyra, didn't last long. The universe, it seemed, had other plans for them. A new mission arrived, and with it, new challenges that would push their bond to its limits. The Alliance needed Marcus for a mission that was both urgent and dangerous, a deep space operation on a planet known for its hostility. Lyra's presence was no longer just a passive detail. She had become a key to the mission. Her knowledge of the region, her experience as a warrior, were invaluable to Marcus. She knew the terrain, the enemy, and the secrets of the galaxy that even the Alliance didn't understand. In short, she was indispensable. But as Marcus looked at her, ready to embark on the mission, he realized something unsettling this time. They were in danger together, not as master and slave, but as allies. The two of them boarded a transport ship bound for the unknown planet, and for the first time, Marcus allowed himself to think of Lyra as more than just someone who was once chained. She had proven herself to be a fighter, a strategist, and above all, someone who could be trusted in the heat of battle. Their journey was long, and the tension between them was palpable. They spoke little, each lost in their own thoughts. Lyra, with her complex history, was a mystery Marcus still didn't understand completely. But in those quiet moments, he knew she was as determined as he was to complete the mission. It was almost as if this dangerous world was their only escape from the unspoken tension that had been building between them. They reached the planet's atmosphere, and Marcus could feel the familiar rush of adrenaline. The cold, dense fog enveloped the landscape as they descended. The planet was known for its treacherous storms, and its surface was riddled with hidden dangers. The mission was simple: retrieve a vital piece of technology the enemy had taken, a device that could shift the balance of power in the galaxy. But Marcus couldn't shake the nagging feeling that this mission was not what it seemed. When the landing gear touched down, it wasn't just the physical danger that struck them, it was the stillness. The planet was eerily quiet, the kind of quiet that signaled danger lurking just beneath the surface. The land stretched before them, hostile and unpredictable. Lyra stood next to Marcus as they surveyed the barren landscape, her expression unreadable. "It doesn't feel right," she said quietly, her voice barely audible over the wind. Marcus nodded, agreeing with her instincts. "Stay alert," he said. "We don't know what's waiting for us here." They moved cautiously through the thick fog, the ground beneath their boots soft and uneven. Marcus led the way, trusting Lyra to keep pace with him. But as they ventured deeper into the planet's treacherous terrain, it became clear that this was no ordinary mission. The planet had a life of its own: strange creatures, hidden traps, and sudden violent storms that could strike without warning. The first attack came without warning. From the fog, a creature emerged, massive, serpentine beast with glowing red eyes. It moved swiftly, its fangs bared, ready to strike. Without hesitation, Lyra drew her weapon and charged forward, her movements fluid and deadly. Marcus followed suit, his weapon aimed and ready. The creature lunged, but Lyra was faster. She fired first, hitting the beast square in the chest. It let out a deafening roar before collapsing onto the ground. Marcus stood there, breathing heavily, watching the creature writhe in its final moments. "Nice shot," he said, impressed by her precision. Lyra didn't reply, her focus already shifting to the next threat. "We're not done yet," she muttered. Scanning their surroundings for more danger, they continued their journey, the planet's dangers becoming increasingly evident. Each step was a test of their teamwork and their trust in one another. They were no longer master and slave, but partners in a fight for survival. The constant threats, the challenges that came at them from every direction, forced them to rely on each other in ways they hadn't before as they made their way to the enemy stronghold. A place that was both their objective and their potential doom. Marcus couldn't help but feel a shift inside him. What had begun as a mission to rescue Lyra had turned into something far deeper. He wasn't just trying to protect her anymore, he was fighting alongside her. As an equal, the Alliance had given him a slave as a reward, but in the process they had unknowingly given him a partner, a warrior, someone who would stand by him, no matter the odds. And now, as they faced the planet's deadliest creatures, Marcus understood that this mission would change everything. Lyra, once a prisoner, was now as much a part of this battle as he was. They were no longer just soldiers. They were something more, something deeper. And Marcus realized, with a clarity he had never felt before, that whatever happened next, they would face it together. Not as master and slave, but as equals. The change of heart, the mission on the hostile planet had changed everything. Marcus no longer saw Lyra as a mere captive, a reward to be claimed. He had seen her fight, not just for survival, but for something far more profound: her freedom, her dignity. And in the heat of battle, when their lives hung by a thread, Marcus realized something deep within himself. Lyra was no longer just someone he had to protect. She was someone he needed. But in the quiet moments that followed the chaos, when they returned to their temporary shelter, the weight of his feelings began to settle heavily on his chest. He had always been a soldier, loyal to the Alliance, driven by duty. But Lyra, her presence in his life was stirring something in him he had never experienced before. Marcus sat on a worn metal crate outside their shelter, staring up at the stars. The same stars that had once given him comfort now seemed distant, like a reminder of how far he had come from the man he once was. Lyra sat nearby, tending to her weapon, her movements fluid, focused. She was different, now stronger, more at peace, though the shadows of her past still lingered in her eyes. She had survived more than he could imagine, yet she was still here, still standing beside him. "Why do you do it?" Marcus asked, his voice low, almost as if he didn't expect an answer. "Why fight so hard?" Lyra paused, looking at him from the corner of her eye. She didn't speak immediately, as if weighing her words carefully. Finally, she stood up, walking over to where he sat, and sat down beside him. "I fight because I have no choice," she said, her voice steady but tinged with something Marcus couldn't quite place. "I fight for my people, for the ones who didn't make it, and for the ones who will come after me. But I also fight because it's the only thing I've ever known." Marcus nodded slowly, understanding more than he expected. War had shaped them both, but in very different ways. Lyra had been born into a life of conflict, while Marcus had chosen it. Yet, in their shared experience, they had both learned the same hard truth. War took everything. It took people, dreams, and hope. The difference between them was that Lyra had survived the wars that had consumed her world. Marcus had survived the war within himself, the struggle between duty and something more human. "I've been thinking," Marcus began, his voice softer now, "about everything we've been through. This mission, this war, it feels like it's just the beginning." Lyra looked at him, her expression unreadable. "It's always just the beginning, Marcus. No matter how many battles we win, the fight never ends." He could feel the truth in her words, but there was something else, something he couldn't ignore. The more he spent time with Lyra, the more he realized that he couldn't keep going down this path alone. She wasn't just someone he had fought alongside. She was someone who had changed him, who had made him question the very system he had sworn allegiance to. "I never wanted this life for you," Marcus said, almost to himself. "I never wanted you to be a slave, a prisoner. But I can't keep pretending that we're just following orders." Lyra turned to him then, her eyes piercing his. There was no anger in them, no bitterness, just understanding. "You don't need to apologize," she said softly. "I'm not a prisoner anymore. I choose to be here with you. For the first time, I'm free." The words hit Marcus like a hammer. She was free not just from the chains that had bound her, but from the life she had once known. And in that freedom, she had chosen him. Not as a master, not as a savior, but as something far more dangerous and equal. Marcus stood up, the weight of his decisions settling around him. He had made his choice. He could no longer ignore the truth of what had been growing between them. This wasn't just a mission. This wasn't just a reward. What had begun as a fight for survival had turned into something deeper, something more real. Lyra stood as well, her eyes meeting his. There was no need for words now. They understood each other perfectly. "I can't go back to being who I was," Marcus said, his voice steady, his gaze unwavering. "I don't want to." Lyra stepped closer, her expression softening. "Neither do I." In that moment, Marcus realized that whatever the future held, it would be shaped by their choices. The war was far from over, but it wasn't the war that defined them anymore. It was the bond they had forged, one that was built on trust, respect, and something much stronger than duty. The road ahead would be difficult, filled with battles that neither of them could predict. But for the first time, Marcus felt a sense of peace. Whatever happened, they would face it together, and that was a battle worth fighting for. The Alliance's judgment, the sound of Marcus's boots, echoed in the empty hallway as he walked toward the briefing room. Lyra was by his side, her eyes alert, her movements fluid, ready for anything. The Alliance's decision was imminent, and the air felt thick with the weight of what was to come. Marcus had never imagined he'd be in this position, standing between loyalty to the system He had served and the woman who had completely changed his view of the galaxy. They had made it through countless dangers together. Fought side by side on that hostile planet and survived the impossible. Lyra was no longer the prisoner of war she once was. She had proven herself time and time again. And Marcus had come to see her as an equal, someone whose courage matched his own. But the Alliance wasn't concerned with such things. They saw Lyra as a trophy, a symbol of victory, not a person. With a future as Marcus entered the briefing room, he was met with the cold, calculating faces of the senior officers. They looked at him with the kind of respect one reserves for a soldier who had done his duty. But their eyes were also filled with a sense of finality, as though they had already decided what his next steps would be. Marcus, the commander, said, his voice as flat as ever. "You've done well. The mission was a success. You retrieved the device and eliminated the threat. You've earned your reward." Marcus's jaw tightened. He knew what was coming. He had seen the look in the commander's eyes. But the words still hit him like a punch to the gut. "This," the commander continued, gesturing to Lyra, who stood quietly beside Marcus, "is part of that reward. As per Alliance protocol, she remains under your ownership. She's a prisoner of war, and as such, she belongs to you." Marcus felt a flicker of anger rising in his chest. It wasn't just anger at the words themselves, was anger at the SPW, at the system that reduced a person's worth to mere ownership. How could the Alliance fail to see what was so obvious to him? Lyra wasn't a piece of property. She was a warrior, a survivor. She was his partner, not his possession. "I've made my decision," Marcus said, his voice steady but firm. "I will not keep her as a slave. She's not a symbol of my victory, nor will she be treated as one." The room fell into an uncomfortable silence. The officers exchanged glances, their expressions unreadable. It was clear they hadn't expected this response. "I'm sorry, Marcus," the commander said, his voice taking on a more condescending tone. "But you don't have a choice. The law is clear. She's your property, and you will abide by that. You are in the military now, and your decisions affect the entire galaxy. Your loyalty to the Alliance must come first." Marcus could feel the weight of the words. Loyalty. It had always been the cornerstone of his life. But now, loyalty felt like a chain, something that was holding him back. The Alliance wasn't just asking him to uphold a law. They were asking him to betray what he had come to believe in. He had fought for freedom, for justice, for something greater than himself. But now they wanted him to keep a woman in chains. They wanted him to follow their rules, even if it meant crushing his own conscience in the process. Lyra's quiet voice broke the silence. "I'm not your prisoner anymore," she said, her tone calm but filled with a quiet strength that sent a shiver down Marcus's spine. The officers looked at her, momentarily taken aback. She had always been silent, distant, but now she was standing before them, defiant and unyielding. "You can't take my freedom away," she continued, her gaze never leaving the commander's. "Not anymore. I am not his possession. I'm a person, not an object." The commander sneered, clearly irritated by Lyra's boldness. "You don't get to decide that," he said sharply. "This is not a matter of personal choice. It's the law." Marcus stepped forward, his fists clenched at his sides. "Served the Alliance for years," he said, his voice low but filled with conviction. "But I will not stand by and watch you turn a woman into a piece of property. I've made my choice. I stand with her." The officers looked at each other, and for the first time, Marcus saw a flicker of uncertainty in their eyes. They were used to soldiers who followed orders without question. But Marcus was different. He had always been different. "Marcus." The commander began again, his voice softer now, but still commanding. Think carefully. You're throwing away everything you've worked for. Your career, your future, your place in the galaxy. You're defying the very system you fought. 4. I'm not throwing anything away, Marcus said, his voice unwavering. I'm standing up for what's right. For her, for us. The future we choose to make. There was a long pause, and the weight of the moment hung heavily in the air. Marcus knew the consequences of his actions would be severe, but he also knew there was no turning back. He had chosen his path. We'll see about that, the commander muttered, his voice filled with a mixture of frustration and resignation. As the meeting ended, Marcus walked out of the room with Lyra by his side, the tension between them palpable. The Alliance had made it clear that they would not let this go easily. But Marcus was no longer concerned about their judgment. The only judgment that mattered now was his own. In that moment, Marcus realized that the true battle was not with the enemy, but with the very system that had enslaved so many for so long. He had chosen to fight for something greater, something more powerful than loyalty to the Alliance. He had chosen to fight for freedom, for love, and for Lyra. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The decision had been made. No more words needed to be spoken. The Alliance had made it clear they would stop at nothing to keep Lyra as a symbol of Marcus's victory, a pawn in their grand game. But Marcus was done following their rules. He had broken away from their control once before, and now, with Lyra by his side, he was about to do it again. They spent their final hours in the Alliance's stronghold, preparing for what would be the most dangerous move of their lives, escaping. The consequences of their actions loomed large, but neither of them could go back. The decision had already been made, and Marcus had no intention of letting the Alliance take control of their lives any longer. Lyra had grown stronger since that first day, shedding the layers of her past like a snake shedding its skin. The woman who once stood chained and broken now stood beside him as an equal, ready to take on whatever dangers awaited them. Marcus had trained his entire life to be a soldier, but he had learned something far more valuable from Lyra. The true meaning of freedom. In the dead of night, they made their move. Quietly, efficiently, they slipped past the guards, their movements blending into the shadows. Every step was calculated, every sound measured, as they made their way to the transport bay. Marcus's heart pounded in his chest, but it wasn't fear that gripped him. It was anticipation, the kind of anticipation he had felt only before the most dangerous missions. But this time, it wasn't just about completing an objective. It was about taking control of their destiny. They reached the hangar, the cold metal walls standing as silent witnesses to their rebellion. The transport ship they had secured was small, inconspicuous, and fast, exactly what they needed. Marcus climbed aboard first, Lyra following closely behind. As the hatch sealed shut behind them, the world outside seemed to hold its breath. "Are you sure this will work?" Lyra asked, her voice steady but laced with the tension of the moment. "There's no turning back now," Marcus said, his fingers moving over the controls. "This is our only chance." With a deep breath, Marcus powered up the ship. The hum of the engines filled the cockpit as the ship slowly lifted off the ground. The noise was deafening, but it was a sound that carried the promise of freedom. The hangar doors opened, and the night sky stretched before them, vast and endless. The cold, lifeless stars were the only things that greeted them as they broke free from the Alliance's grasp. They were now fugitives, wanted by the most powerful force in the galaxy. But to Marcus and Lyra, that was no longer a threat. It was a promise. As the ship sped into the atmosphere, Marcus glanced at Lyra. There was no fear in her eyes, no hesitation. She had made her choice long ago, and now, as they flew toward the unknown, she was more than just a survivor. She was his partner in every sense of the word. "This is it," Marcus said quietly, his eyes fixed on the stars ahead. The beginning of something new. Lyra nodded, her gaze steady. What now? Marcus's grip tightened on the controls as he adjusted their course. Now, we make our own future. Together. The Alliance would be hunting them. They knew that. The galaxy, with all its systems and rules, would try to hunt them down, break them apart. But they had already won the most important battle, the battle for their freedom. They were no longer bound by the rules of an empire that sought to control everything in its path. In the vast expanse of space, with the stars their only witnesses, Marcus and Lyra were free. But the journey ahead would not be easy. There would be dangers, enemies, and obstacles at every turn. Yet, as long as they had each other, they knew they could face anything. The ship soared through the atmosphere, taking them to a place where they could be free to start anew. Marcus had been a soldier, but now he was a man with a new purpose. Lyra had been a slave, but now she was more than that. She was the woman who had given him something he never thought he would find: hope. And as they flew off into the endless night, they knew one thing above all else: they would face the future. Together, no chains, no masters. Only two souls, bound not by force, but by choice. The wedding of rebels. The galaxy was vast, but in the quiet corners of a forgotten planet, Marcus and Lyra found something that neither of them had ever expected: peace. It wasn't the kind of peace that came from an absence of conflict, but the kind that came from knowing that they had chosen each other in the midst of chaos. They had fought side by side, survived the impossible, and now, for the first time, they were free, not just from the Alliance, but from the chains of their past. In the small, secluded village they had found refuge in, they built a life together. It wasn't easy, nothing worthwhile ever was, but every day they built something stronger than the war they had escaped. They found comfort in the small moments, the quiet dinners they shared, the laughter that filled their tiny home, the shared understanding that they had both chosen this life, this future. And yet, even in their peaceful corner of the galaxy, a storm was always lurking in the distance. They knew that the Alliance would never forget what they had done. Marcus and Lyra would forever be hunted fugitives, branded as rebels and traitors. But for the first time, the weight of their actions didn't feel like a burden. It felt like a new beginning. One evening, as the two of them sat beneath the vast sky, the air filled with the soft hum of the planet's winds, Marcus turned to Lyra with a question that had been growing in his heart for months. "Lyra," he began, his voice steady but filled with a quiet intensity, "we've fought so hard to get here, to find this freedom. And now, I want to make sure we don't lose it." Lyra looked at him, her eyes soft but knowing. She had always been the strong one, the one who held her emotions in check. But in the moments they shared, in the space between the battles and the struggles, she had begun to open up, to trust, to love. "You don't have to keep fighting for me, Marcus," she said, her voice low but filled with something unspoken. "You've already given me everything: freedom, a future, a place to call my own. I never thought this would be possible, but now I can see it. A life without chains." The words, simple but profound, settled in Marcus's heart. He had given her freedom, but in doing so, he had found his own. He had been a soldier for most of his life, always following orders, always fighting for others. But in Lyra, he had found someone worth fighting for, a woman who didn't need saving, but someone who had fought for herself, for what she believed in. Marcus stood and extended his hand to her. "Then, let's make it official. Don't just want to fight for you. I want to spend my life with you, Lyra." Her eyes widened, and for a moment, time seemed to stand still. She had always known Marcus as a soldier, as a man who followed the rules, but now she saw him as something more, someone who had chosen to live for something greater than war. "I can't imagine a future without you," she said softly, taking his hand. Marcus led her to a small clearing, the stars overhead a perfect backdrop for what was about to happen. There were no grand ceremonies here, no elaborate celebrations. Just two people who had fought against everything the galaxy had thrown at them, now choosing to fight for each other in the presence of only a few close friends, fellow rebels, and survivors, who had also found their way to this peaceful planet. Marcus and Lyra stood before each other, their hands clasped tightly. The moment was simple, but it was theirs, and that was enough. Marcus, Lyra said, her voice steady but filled with emotion, "I vow to stand beside you through whatever comes our way. I vow to fight with you, to love you, and to never let go of what we found." "And I vow the same," Marcus replied, his voice thick with emotion. "I will fight for you, for us, for this life we've chosen. You are no longer just a prisoner, Lyra. You are my partner, my equal, my everything." With those words, they sealed their vows not with rings or lavish ceremonies, but with a promise that no one could take away. A promise that no matter what the galaxy threw at them, they would face it together. The future was uncertain, the galaxy still a dangerous place. But in this moment, surrounded by the quiet beauty of a distant planet, Marcus and Lyra found something that had been stolen from both of them long ago. A future. The stars above them were vast, but the space between them felt smaller, now filled with the unbreakable bond they had forged. They had escaped the tyranny of the galaxy, not just physically, but in their hearts. They were no longer prisoners to anyone or anything. Together, they had created something no one could take away. A future bound by choice, not by force. And in that moment, Marcus knew that whatever the universe threw at them next, they would face it together, side by side, always.